We are a podcast for product marketers and B2B SaaS who feel misunderstood of what they do.
From someone who truly gets what you do and
basically help you feel less like a misfit, being unignorable in your role.
Exciting episode of We're Not Marketers. This is Zach Roberts on the mic, sales water lad. Before we pass it off to you know who's best over here, our co-host, we got a special guest here, but let's introduce the co-host first. Let's pass it over to Eric.
Yo, what's up? Eric Holland, Franken manager. I'm loving it here. So glad you keep me around. And for our last co-host, Gab, give an intro.
Thank you, Gab Bujour, Sales Deck Associate. I just keep doing Sales Deck until I die, and I'll pass it back to Zach.
All right, thanks, y'all. Team, I am so excited to introduce this next guest. And it's not because of the latte I had 6 hours ago. That's why I'm so hyped. This individual is by far, I have to say, it's one of the top 5 managers in product marketing I've worked with. And if you were to look at her background, when she was studying music education back at Oberlin and education itself, you would look back and say, this is not going to be the next product marketing leader of 2025. But she started her career there, had a short stint in journalism, went back, got her MBA because she said, you know what, y'all are not ready for me right now. Continue to grow her career and pivot in product marketing from Microsoft over to Tanium. And now currently she's the VP of marketing today at Lakeside Software. We are so excited to introduce Chanel Chambers on the mic right now. Chanel, how are you doing? So good to be chatting with you.
I am awesome. And thank you so much for that intro. I very much appreciate it.
I'm like, Chanel, the original draft I had to be shortened down because it's an hour-long conversation.
Yeah.
Hey, so Chanel, again, we briefed you here before the episode starts, but Gab's already looking over at me because he's ready. He's got this question for you. We ask every guest. He's rubbing his hands right there. Let's pass it off. Gab, you got this.
Thank you. By the way, Zach has been killing it with the intro for season 4, so it's well appreciated. I'm trying to find a way of how I can push myself with that question, but here it is. Chanel, are product marketers actually marketers? Why or why not?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question. I'll do the TLDR first. Yes, product marketers are marketers. Here's the longer answer. Marketing, the root of the word marketing is market. And a market basically is all of the things that cause a customer or a buyer to buy what it is that they have. So if I were to break it down in Business School 101, when you think about marketing, it's about the marketing mix, right? It's about product. It's about promotion or advertising. That's what most people think of when they think of the term marketing. But really, when you look at a market, you need to think about what product is it that you're selling? How are you going to promote that product? Then you think about placement, which is also channel or distribution, like where are the places I'm going to sell this? How am I going to sell this? And then finally, pricing and packaging, right? And so if you think about the one area of marketing that touches all of that entire marketing mix, it's product marketing, right? So demand gen might focus on the promotion, product management might focus on the product. Maybe you have some partner or distributing people who handle placement. But when it comes to all 4 parts of the basic marketing mix, product marketing is right there at the center.
Well, then it almost sounds to me like we're the only marketers and everyone else is just, they're infringing on our territory when they'd like to.
Yeah.
And only picking the piece of the pie that they want to eat off of.
Yeah, I think when people say, and this is really, it's kind of cliche, but it really does make sense. When you think about people saying that product marketing is the quarterback or the orchestra conductor or the cat herder, whatever you want to say, that's really what they mean, is that product marketing has a little piece of all of it. And the main goal of a product marketer should be to make sure that it's all working together in a unified way to make sure that you're selling the product, so landing the product, expanding the product, so that's cross-sell and upsell, and making sure that your customers, especially in a B2B SaaS environment, your customers are renewing, right? Because you don't have a business unless you have customers, and if your customers are churning, then you don't have a business, right? So it's land, expand, retain, and how to use all of those levers, all 4 of those levers in concert to make sure that you achieve your goals.
One of
I
my
wonder.
favorite answers. That was.
I'm telling
Do
y'all, Chanel's got
do you
me.
speak publicly often? That sounded great. I'd go and listen to that class. Just boom, like legit. Probably what, college, university level. Sit down. I don't know anything about product marketing because they don't teach those classes anyways. We found our first and only professor right here, guys. Get Chanel at We're Not Marketers University. First hire. That's our first hire. Let's go. That was
No.
So I'm curious, like when you break that down and you're thinking how we're at the center, and I think our philosophy is similar to yours. We want to be at the center, but we don't want to we're getting pushed out maybe to the outskirts in a lot of ways, sometimes exiled into unemployment. So can you help any of our listeners help gain that confidence, say, you know what, I do belong in the middle. I should be involved in that orchestration and waving and making sure that all of the different instruments sound great together instead of disparagingly just pounding away at notes.
Yeah. So I think that everybody wants to be important, right? Including we as product marketers. The thing, though, about human nature is that want does not mean anything at the end of the day, right? I want to have $1 million, right? But it doesn't really matter unless I can do something of value that's worth $1 million. So we might want to be in the center of everything that's going on as product marketers, but before people really put us at that center, we need to show that we can drive value at the center. So what exactly does that mean? It means not just staying in your lane, right? Really approaching, especially if you're a consultant or a contractor, really approaching the business as a business, not as I'm a product marketer and what can I do on the marketing end. So there are lots of concrete things that I could say about what that means, but I think the main takeaway is understanding how that business makes money, obviously, and what all of those levers are. So I talked about the 4 Ps of marketing, but when you think about business as a whole, there are many other levers. Okay, so it really starts by adding value to the business, right? And that means approaching the business as a business person would and not necessarily as a marketing person would. So a simple way to think about this is how does the business make money? And you can think about that in 3 areas, which I mentioned already. How does the business land new customers, get new money? How do they get more money from those same customers? So that's expansion, upsell, et cetera. And then how does the company retain customers? So that's the land, expand, retain. And by just using those 3 things, you can start to understand a little bit more about the company, where they're having problems in their funnel, for example, right? So is it landing? Is it expanding? Is it retaining? Is it all 3? And it just helps you. It guides your questions, guides your discovery when you start at a company or when you're a contractor, either way, or a consultant. And it helps you think about how you might approach your solutions. Because when you think about it in terms of how the company makes money, you automatically have a way of measuring success. Everything that you do is now attached to whether you landed more money or landed new money, made more money by expansion, or kept money from going out the door in the form of churn. So it just helps with that explanation at the end of the day.
This is very refreshing, and I think it's because of argument like that some people put PMMs as business strategists, right? You want to make the organization win, and this is basically sparking our conversation. A question I have for you: a lot of people, like especially PMMs, are taking the route to solopreneurship. You have 2 examples in front of you, and I feel like the best thing with that is when you start thinking about, okay, there's an area of the business I need to solve. You can use your unique background to come up with very unique or differentiated value you can bring to the business. You're someone who was in music. Myself, I dabbled a bit in classical singing in the past, but we'll just put that in the secret box for now.
Okay.
I'm curious,
I won't tell.
how does your unique past experience help you showing up in your current leadership position?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because the one tangent I could go on is that in my years of being in product, whether it's product marketing or product management, I have met so many people who have music backgrounds, like advanced music backgrounds, from professional singing to PhDs in music theory to music educators like myself. It's just really interesting. I think music and technology go together in a few ways. And one of those ways is really thinking around frameworks. And I know I've used that word a lot, frameworks, but to me, frameworks are like the musical scales of business, right? Because when you, especially if you're a composer or someone who does jazz or has to improvise a lot, improvising isn't about knowing all of the songs. When you go to a bar mitzvah or something like that, and you see the band and they have this big fake book. I don't know if people know what fake books are, but basically, fake books are books of really popular songs so that when you go to the band and you say, hey, can you play Misty or one of the standards? They flip through the fake book and then it sounds like they know how to play it because it's actually all in the book. Um, that's one way to do it, but that's actually inefficient when you think about it. I like to think about scales and the ways that all the 12 scales that we have in Western music, those are all encompassed by all the music that we have in the world, if you think about it. So, all the way back from Bach and Beethoven, all the way up to Taylor Swift, they're all using the same 12 or 24 scales, however you want to major, minor, whatever. But there's a finite number of scales or a finite number of frameworks that you can apply to pretty much any music or business situation. And so I think that the training that musicians have in thinking about frameworks and how to apply those frameworks across time and across genre really does help you when it comes to thinking about business problems.
With that example you were mentioning about like the 12 scales of music from like the beginning of time to today, when I hear that, I think about like business problems that we might be solving as product marketers, not being unique, but derivatives of problems we've seen before. Does that
Yes,
sound accurate?
I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I prefer to think of it not so much as we're seeing the same problems. It's more about the way we address those problems has a way that we can address them in an orderly way. Maybe the problems of today, in fact, I do believe the problems of today, especially around things like AI, are really different from the problems that we had in the past. However, the way of addressing those problems and the effect that those problems have on the business are the same. For example, every company in the world is thinking about how AI affects how they do business, meaning going back to the land, expand, retain framework. How does AI actually help me land new customers? We have a lot of customers thinking about, or a lot of companies thinking about AI salespeople or AI marketing. And same way, people are thinking, how can I expand my business using AI? A lot of people are using AI to packaging AI solutions as product extensions, especially if they're in software, right? And then they're thinking things like, how can I use AI to help me retain my customers? So, same thing. So, it's not so much that the problems are the same, it's that the way of thinking about how to come to solutions or how to address those problems can be the same because the outcomes are the same. The outcomes on the business are the same because businesses will always want to make money. That's why business exists. And the three ways you make money are those three: land, expand, and retain customers.
You touched a bit upon AI, and I'm
Zach,
curious, what's that?
are you pivoting? Because I had a question. Like, it was pretty blunt, but I
Okay.
don't want to cut you off.
Ask the blunt question. Let's get it going.
I'll pivot away. You asked that question.
And this was towards the earlier part of all of this, but so my process would be like, hey, I want to help reduce churn or something like that. I almost want to start saying, I want to help prevent money going out the door.
Yeah.
Like using those simple terms and just it's the same message, of course, but like the actual delivery of that felt so much more powerful coming out of you than me saying, I want to add new prospects to the pipeline or I want to save customers from churning. Just like the business terms of you got to make money, you got to spend money, and you got to make sure that money is not actually sneaking out the back door. And that's what I took from that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that being able to come into a client or come into a new permanent situation, either way, and very quickly ascertaining what needs to be done is valuable. And I think that it's very impressive to a client when you come in knowing the right questions to ask. I think a lot of people think that they need to come in and immediately start bossing people around and telling people how to solve it. But really, the way that product marketers build more credibility is coming in and asking the right questions. And so I think the wrong questions, and I hate to be black and white about it, but I think the wrong questions from what I've seen from product marketers are questions that you can find on the website already. Like when product marketers, new junior product marketers will come and they'll spend, maybe they have a precious 15 or 20 minutes with the product leader and they spend it trying to understand the names of the product and what the products do, right? Those would be the wrong questions to ask. The right questions to ask are all around what I call outcomes, right? So outcome based questions leading to outcome based metrics. So an example of an outcome would be something that happens when you've gone through all the right things. Let's say I wanted to lose 50 pounds. That's my outcome based goal. The activity based things that I would do would be maybe stop eating carbs and go to the gym 5 days a week. Those are activities. But a lot of people will measure the activities as the outcome. We all know people who've cut their calories to 500 a day and go to the gym 7 days a week, yet they don't lose any weight. That is not a successful outcome, right? So what you need to be focused on is what is the outcome? And so in that case, in the anecdote I just said, it's the outcome is losing 50 pounds. At the end of the day, if I can lose 50 pounds on Ozempic and not ever go to the gym, that's a successful outcome. Like I don't care about the activities. So same thing in business. If I can make more money doing something other than product marketing, that's a great outcome. And I have to be enough of a business person to understand what the goal is. And the goal is always an outcome, it's never an activity.
With that perspective, because when I hear that, Chanel, I think a lot about like when we were like in product marketers internal meetings, just, oh, we got to deliver X number of personas. We
Mhm.
have to create X number of blogs.
Yep.
We have, yeah. So I'm curious, like with that context, like how should product marketers now try to navigate like those outcome based metrics? Because it feels there's so much information that is very overwhelming that some of us, I think, like knee jerk towards the activity metrics
Yeah.
as a result of that.
I think that is the best question for a podcast like this because that's the difference. A lot of times we don't always have control over the level that we are in the organization, right? And so most organizations will have an executive level goal and they know what's going on. And then everybody else gets cascaded down these activities. And sometimes you can be assigned an activity like create X number of personas and really lose context around why you're doing it or what success looks like. And that to me is a real shame because what it leads to is a lot of people in silos trying to achieve their own personal activities without aligning it to what the actual business goal is. And unfortunately, that is the case in a lot of organizations. A couple of things that can be done, though, and I was actually just having a conversation with someone about this last week. One thing that can be done is first awareness and this podcast is an example of that. Be aware that businesses have like a finite thing that they're trying to do, namely land, expand, and retain. And if you even want to simplify it even more, expand and retain are actually the same thing, right? Because net dollar retention, you can actually retain net dollars by either selling more to the same people or just not losing them. But anyway, so you want to land new money or expand the money that you have. That's really the only thing that the business is doing. So that's step one is just being aware that the purpose of the business is not to deliver personas. So what that means is if I'm the person assigned to delivering those personas, step two is I go to my manager or my skip level or someone in the business who can help me understand how what I'm doing, these personas, fits into those two goals of the business. And then step three is either with your manager or by yourself, really understanding, because maybe sometimes it's 1 degree of separation, sometimes it's 3 or 4 degrees of separation of exactly how what I am doing is affecting those goals, who's involved, so who are the stakeholders, and then making sure that those people, those stakeholders are aware of what you're doing and how what you're doing directly affects the business goals. So it's like an influence map, right? And so if I'm using the persona example, okay, what are these personas doing? Usually the personas are helping sales or sometimes customer success break down who they might be talking about or talking to in their ICP. And so let's understand that. What is your ICP? First of all, what does ICP mean? If you don't know, you maybe should find that out. But like really dig in on what it is you're doing and how that affects the stakeholders of the business until you get to one of those two metrics that I mentioned, land or expand and retain.
I really like that take because I worked on a previous project before where I had this question where it was like I was doing a product debrief with the client of, okay, let's
Mhm.
get to the nuts and bolts of who's the feature, what's the feature, who's it for? And from the
Yeah.
website, they were like, oh, this is going to be for demand, this is like for demand gen marketers. And
Yep.
I wrote that down and I said, okay, like it sounds like our target ICP that we're going after is demand gen. And then actually for this year, we want to go for C-level. That is our target. But then there was this friction, as you imagine. It's like, okay, as a seller, C-level can range from CFO to like your
Yeah.
chief data officer. I prefer demand gen marketer. And I'm curious to get more of your perspective on this, Michelle, because as someone who's leading product marketing, like, how come we run into this problem of in order to make more money, it means that we've got to have more personas because it feels like from what I'm seeing, it sounds counterintuitive, but I might be wrong in that assessment. I'm curious like what your take on that is.
Yeah, I think this idea of really figuring out your ICP, also known as ideal customer profile, and then all of the personas who are involved in that, it's work that is central to being a product marketer, but it's not nearly enough. It's like a term paper, right? So we have to do term papers in college to pay our dues and to prove that we know what we're talking about, but no one wants to read a term paper, right? What people want to know is that what you learned when doing it or the outcome or the takeaway, right? And so a lot of times product marketers will approach this type of work like ICP or persona work as if it's the takeaway, when really it's just the research that you have to do in order to be fluent with the takeaway. So I think when it comes to the personas, nobody, in the same way that nobody really wants to read a term paper, nobody really wants to go through Harry the handyman. He's 38 years old and because it's necessary, but that's not really the goal. The goal is how does Harry the handyman contribute to, guess what am I going to say? Landing, expanding, or retaining. So is Harry the handyman the buyer? Is Harry the handyman the user? If he's, let's say he's a user of the thing that you're selling, what effect does he have maybe on churn or retention? Can making him happy grow business by encouraging him to use the product more or buy more product or tell the buyer that he really needs it? Or is he could possibly be a churn driver, right? If Harry the handyman doesn't like it, even though he's not a buyer, like what effect does that have on your business? So it's really using what you know about Harry the handyman and not just presenting it, but interpreting it in terms of what makes sense for the business. And that's when you'll find that you get people's attention. As soon as you throw the slide up with Harry the handyman and a cute little image that you probably spend an hour on with his little yellow hard hat and everything else with all his demographic information, as soon as you do that, they are asleep. But if you say, I researched Harry the Handyman persona across your ICP, and did you know that this persona is responsible for $38 million in churn last year or whatever? Now you have their attention. This persona of Harry the Handyman has led this kind of churn because the product's too hard to use, or Harry maybe doesn't speak the language that you're in, and therefore, your documentation is weak, or whatever it is, right? Those are insights rather than reports.
I love it. Love the way you put it. And yeah, we take those notions so much for granted, but ultimately it's not, hey, I did this as an asset and let's get on it. It's more like what insights are we able to get of that? And I really love the landing and expanding approach, which is bringing me to my next question. When, I'm PMM, I understand ICP, I understand persona, I understand that I need to know my stuff. In a lot of organization, even if you know that, what you lack is influence. And this is something we
Mhm.
talked a lot about the pod. From your point of view, how do we practice influence as PMMs to be able to have those conversations and ultimately driving the ship to that landing and maintaining that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, influence is 100% a function of the value that you're bringing to people. And when I say value, I don't necessarily mean financial immediately. What I mean is that insight about Harry the Handyman driving $36 million of churn for these reasons. That's valuable to someone. That's something they didn't know, right? And so it's it's easier said than done, right? But that's an example of the kind of value that you can provide. But to be more specific about how to get to that value, it's about being curious. And I know that sounds really cliche because everybody's always talking about be curious, but really you don't come to a lot of these insights by just ticking off. I can give you all the frameworks in the world, right? I can say the way to get to that insight is to do all these things. But if you're just going through that as a checklist or like a piece of homework, the way that you might have done in high school, you're going to miss it because you have to be fundamentally curious about the thing that you're doing. Because when you're fundamentally curious, you're going to ask more questions. You're going to approach the problem in a more fun way, and frankly it's going to be more fun. So that's the first thing, is being curious. The other one, and I think I've Zach and I have talked about this a lot, is being truly okay with ambiguity, especially at the beginning of a project, right? Be okay with the fact that you don't know everything, but very quickly after that, you be okay with the fact that you don't know everything. Be curious about sucking up all the information you can. But very quickly after that, you need to have a point of view. And that point of view doesn't necessarily have to be right, but it does have to be something, it has to be a point at which you can compare everything else that's coming to you and then make a judgment. And so once you have that point of view, then you can use your impact and influence. And this is where you're starting to gain that influence. You have a point of view that is supported by the things that you know. And then you go to everyone that you meet with some sort of insight or piece of value saying, "Hey, did you know this?" And then they're either going to agree with you, and that's going to be great because like your influence with them has already increased, or they're going to disagree with you and they're going to push back. And that's where you can test your assumptions. Again, be curious. But with the people who push back, those are actually people who are doing you a favor, because if they, as long as they do it respectfully, because they're asking you to test your assumptions, and they're going to make sure that you have whatever it takes, whether that's data or whatever, to make sure that you can defend those and impact others. Because as I said earlier, PMM is really an impact role. And so without mastering the ways of delivering value to people in every interaction, you're really going to have a hard time because, like I said earlier, everybody wants to be important and everybody wants to be impactful. But unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way just because we ask, right? We got to give to get.
Love it. And yeah, you're right. Like being curious is a very good tip. And I feel like one of the pitfalls we have is we're curious with our colleagues, we're curious with other department, but we might be falling in, oh, I can help you. I can help you. I can help you do something. And then our role might be transformed into basically an asset building function, which again, we know that a lot of PMMs are just basically have it to do always ongoing because they always need to create and craft
Yeah.
stuff for others.
Yeah, and one thing, and sometimes I mess with people. This is terrible of me, but sometimes when I meet a PMM or maybe I'm interviewing someone or whatever, I will just probe like how much they know about things that are maybe not directly in their wheelhouse. So, one of my favorite questions to ask, and sometimes people genuinely can't answer, but a lot of times people don't know. How much money did your company make last year? What was the mix of that revenue? However you define that, right? Whether it's premium mix or whatever. What was your churn? How many customers do you have? What are the verticals? Just like basic business questions to find out how oriented they are in the thing that they claim to be marketing. Because if you don't know your business, how can you market it?
Yep. So that's spot on. I know when I was working with a team of 8 other PMMs, we needed to be like absolutely certain of our numbers, daily active users, and everything else.
Yes.
So yeah, it's like the basic, but it's something we might be forgetting.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a lot of time, and even for me, if you ask me every single metric of the business, I probably don't know it all, but it grounds you in, okay, what's the big picture here? Every day, like we all get sucked into minute details of our own individual jobs. I'm no different, but it's always important to remind yourself that there is a big picture here, and I like to have 3 or 4 metrics that I always know that are in the back of my mind that I can just sprinkle into conversation sometimes because that helps other people be focused on what matters.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's really the same question, but with a little meta approach.
Uh-oh.
So if you don't mind,
Okay. Yeah.
just a little context. I start a new role, and the problem that I'm learning that the software solves is that most company goals are not transparent or tied to individual activities from ICs. So knowing what I know, and I think cerebrally I just knew this anyways, but that is not normally a culture in especially larger organizations. Like, hey, we need to make sure everyone knows what these top line company goals are, and everything you do needs to be tied to that. So keep in mind, assuming a product marketer definitely wants to take your advice and start building that influence and making themselves attached to those numbers. Do you got any little bit extra advice on how to do so when you're going to a company that doesn't do that, regardless of your function?
Yeah, and I would say more companies than not. So the majority of companies are more opaque that way. They don't share sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for not so good reasons. They don't share a lot of those numbers. I would say collect as many metrics as you can. So one thing that I've noticed in every organization I've been in, there's usually some sort of quarterly all hands that the executives will go through, and they always share some sort of metric. Sometimes they won't share revenue, but they'll share some kind of metric that helps people understand. And for the longest time, especially earlier in my career, those all hands are so much information that I really didn't know what to focus on. And so it just washes over you. But if you listen closely, 9 times out of 10, they'll cover some metric, whether it's a sales or especially at the beginning of the year with sales kickoffs going on. How many of your sellers went to President's Club versus how many you have? That's an interesting one. It's probably not one that they're tracking, but you can make some inferences from that. So, for example, there are companies where maybe they have 10 sellers and maybe only 3 go to President's Club. There are a lot of inferences there. One is around sales enablement. What happened in on the sales enablement function that only 30% of your sellers have made it to club?
I know what
And then
happened.
what does that look like? What happened?
I know what happened. They didn't have Zach hired on. That's what happened.
Exactly. They didn't have that. Yeah. I would say that in the case of places that are not forthcoming with those metrics, get them wherever you can. And also, you'd be surprised at what a one-on-one meeting will do too, right? With your manager or with your skip level or anybody who might have any insight. And you don't need to like be accusatory about it or play 20 questions, but work it in. Oh yeah, I was at the all hands yesterday and it seems like the company's doing really well. What was that number? How much did we make? Or what is that growth? Just kind of slip it in. And I keep in my notebook, I always write down any numbers that people just drop. And depending on who they are, those numbers could be right or wrong or whatever, but just gathering information.
Following up with that about one-on-ones and just meetings in general. One thing I want to give a spotlight on you, shout out, is that from my time working with you, is that there's this innate ability of how you are able to navigate internal conflicts in meetings. And it's like a difference in expectation. I remember one conversation, I think it was like years ago, where it was just like, this is the number I'm seeing, this is the number I'm seeing. And the way you were able to handle that, it's just such a unique superpower that I myself try to model in everything I'm doing. Even when we're on this pod where someone disagrees and says where product marketers are marketers. I'm really curious from you, is that like, how, like, what if I'm a product marketer listening right now and I'm going into a call where I'm just like, I'm on edge because I know that the numbers are not looking good. It's going to be rife for potential conflict. How can I walk out of that meeting and create that into an influence building moment? Taking that obstacle that is giving me heartburn into something that, like, yo, this is like, I'm raising my credibility. I'm building impact from that experience.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear more.
Yeah, I think part of it depends on if you are consulting versus internal. I think that's one thing. But generally, it's if you have really bad news, you want to share it early with the people who, like, for example, let's say you're a consultant with your one-on-one, share it with your champion or whoever brought you into that organization in the way that you mentioned, right? Hey, I got some bad news. Be open about it and seek to be problem solvers. And it's hard to answer this question because it really depends on a lot of things, right? It depends on if the bad news is something that you did or the bad news just happened or what. And it also depends on whether you're internal or external, because if you're external, they could fire you over it. If they're internal, they could fire you over it, but you have a little bit more leeway. But the point here is that you want to share information that is critical and material early so that people don't find out in a big meeting, right? So if it's one of those things where you're going into a big meeting, you have bad news, share that with your champion and then make it a problem that you are solving together. Hey, got bad news. Here's what it is. As we're going into this meeting with the rest of the team, how do we want to approach this? And then go from there. And then always in your head, have an idea of what you think a solution could be. But I wouldn't necessarily volunteer that immediately, depending on how it goes. But I would never go into a situation where you are expressing a problem without some idea of a solution. I think that's pretty basic. And most people know, don't just come to your boss or your client with problems, also come with solutions. Depending on how big the problem is, you might want to let them go first in terms of recommending a solution. But that's where you just have to use your intuition.
Well,
I hope that was helpful.
No, I totally resonate. And I think one of the biggest things that has helped me last 5 years just go from what am I doing and what is happening to I don't know what's happening, but I've got an idea of how to fix it. And that just having that perspective and being courageous enough, like you said, to offer it up when appropriate and maybe defer when not appropriate, I think is definitely some great advice and changes a lot of the conversations that I have, particularly as someone who likes to learn from failure.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing, especially as a consultant, but even if you are a full-time person somewhere, approaching people as peers really helps too. And I know that sounds weird because maybe you're talking to a C-level person or whatever, but really going to them very similarly in the way that Zach just did. Hey, I got to share something with you. This is what happened. This is what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? And just instead of being like, oh my gosh, I'm this lowly intern who made a mistake, don't fire me kind of thing, just like at the end of the day, we are all peers because we're all human, right? And all humans are equal. And so go into it with the confidence of, hey, I made a mistake, or this is a problem, or whatever it is. Go into it feeling like you're talking to a peer, even if you're not, right? But it's that thought that's going to help you conduct yourself with confidence.
It sounds like there's an underlying affirmation right there too. It's just, yeah, I'm hearing that, I'm feeling that. It's look, I'm your peer. So like carrying that energy, I like that.
Yeah, on a human level, we're peers, right? Maybe you are like 16 levels above me and make a lot more money, but like on a human level, we're peers.
David
Yo.
versus Goliath.
Did we just get through a full hour and I felt like it was 10 minutes? Are we almost at the top of the hour here, or is my clock
Time bending?
I'm legit, guys. That is by far the fastest. I was locked in.
It flew by.
Locked in.
Yeah.
We didn't
you.
start late or anything. That's wild.
I'm
Wow.
telling you.
Great call on the guest, Zach.
I told you guys. I told you guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry for the derailment. I just looked up. I was like, holy moly. Okay.
This has been really fun. I love you guys. You have great chemistry together, and you had great questions. I thought that is really
Thank
fun.
you. The secret is we hate each other, though. No, I'm kidding.
Wait, yeah, we're secretly competing against each other now. We're trying to say who asks the better questions.
That's why we're like in 3 different countries, speaking 3 different languages. Like that's the key.
This was great, honestly. You were such a refreshing conversation.
Yeah.
I know that what we really like to do over the last hour is put you in the spotlight, but we're going to put you a little bit further.
Okay.
So we love anyone who's listening in to be able to find you. So obviously LinkedIn's the obvious place, but is there anywhere else that you'd like them to check out? Maybe a website or something? And also, do you have anything coming out that you'd like anyone to know about? Any side hustles, little projects?
Yeah, I saw that in the questionnaire, and at this point, they're not anything that I think would be interesting for the masses. I'll be at a couple of Gartner events presenting, but they're so small that I don't really have anything at this moment. So you can just put my LinkedIn on there and tell people to reach out. I think that's good enough.
All right. Guys, you got any last questions for her?
Oh.
Yeah. If you do, just let me know.
We'll come find you.
Okay.
Absolutely. This is great.
Yes.
All right.
That's another episode of We're Not Marketers. Catch you next time.
All right.
Thanks, you guys.
See you later. All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to We're Not Marketers. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, review our podcast, and share this episode with other PMMs. Thanks again, and see you soon.